reporters love, and so does the public, when they make the request and you email it back within minutes because you've had a heads up that the request is coming in. So that's what those kind of open lines of communications are really about, right?
Yeah, and communications guys love it when reporters make a request and you all wait until the 23rd hour of the 10th day to send it back to them. So it all works out both ways, right?
Yeah, don't do that, right? Right.
Well, I'm supposed to tell you not to do that.
Yes. So if you had...
Depends who the reporter is.
If you had,
can we name names?
No, you cannot. If you had one piece of advice...
I promised the Attorney General I would not say anything bad about the Dallas Morning News, so I'm not going to do it. Okay. Not going to call any paper by name. The
Attorney General office, the Attorney General actually, you were the only one named in his speech. He said he may stick around, but he didn't. He might stick around.
Well, then I will start naming names if he's not here.
Yeah. So, okay, so one piece of advice, we're going to finish up with one piece of advice, and then we're going to open up for some questions. One piece of advice that you could give, take away, what would you tell folks on dealing with the media, getting better with dealing with the media?
Absolutely. I think the thing I would tell you is you have to realize, people on both sides of political aisles, they have their comments on the media. Everybody talks about the media. But the reality is when you live in a world where you have to deal with the media every day, you have to realize the culture of the media has dramatically changed. No matter which generation you are in today, the media has changed so much, even in the short amount of time that we've all been alive in this room. And when I say that, there's an epitaph on the front of the Dallas Morning News building in Dallas, I'm not talking about paper, that I just happen to have here in my pocket. And when Mr. Dealey, who's a publisher of Dallas News, in 1906, he gets his staff together and he says these words. They were so impactful that they went and chiseled them on the front of the Dallas Morning News headquarters in downtown Dallas. Listen to these words. Build the news upon the rock of truth and righteousness. Conduct it always upon the lines of fairness and integrity. Acknowledge the right of people to get from the newspaper both sides of every important question. Man, it's no wonder the Dallas Morning News had to move out of that building 2 months ago. They couldn't sit behind that. Folks, the media has changed so much. There was an era where we would wake up and read the newspaper and you would actually get news. There were real trained, degreed journalists who were writing and producing articles and news pieces. Newspapers were profitable. Television stations were rich. Networks were mega gazillionaires. There was no social media. These people had to work. Today it's different. Everything is World Wide Web driven. Reporters don't ever have to leave their apartment or their house. They troll Twitter all morning, steal a bunch of ideas, and jot down some crappy article by 3 o'clock in the afternoon so that it can get published or put on television that night. My granddad and his buddies would sit around a police scanner in downtown Dallas, and when something big happened, they would jump in the cruiser with a camera and a microphone, and they went and found out what was going on. There's none of that today. What you see in the news is opinions of what people wrote on Twitter and social media during the day. And so you have to know that when you face these folks, and when you're representing your city or your county or the principal who leads whatever organization you're a part of, you have to be in the mindset that these people are not doing homework. They're not trying to present both sides of every question to our readers, as Mr. Dealey suggested in 06. They're trying to get their deal across, their narrative, their bias. And it's gotten so bad in newspapers especially that I almost have gotten to the point where I avoid the newspaper people at all costs. Because newspapers have fired all or had to let go all of their good journalists. They've replaced them with 25, 30-year-old activists. They peddle their rags on Groupon. You can't, you want to get Dallas Morning News Today, you got to go to Groupon, pay $19.99 for like a 65-year subscription. I mean, it's a joke. It literally is. And so you say, well, there you go, just sound like one of those conservative guys ripping the media. Let me tell you something. If you've dealt with them, you know I'm right. And it doesn't matter if your boss or the entity you represent leans to the left, leans to the right, Republican, conservative, or whatever. They have one job, and it's not to build you up. And so you have to, Justin, if you ask the question, what's the one piece of advice you give in dealing with media? Know who you're dealing with. That's it. That's what I'd say.
All right, you guys have any questions?
Thank you. The question is, does off the record actually exist anymore? The quick answer is, of course not. The Marc answer is, you get one shot. And if I ever tell you something off the record and I see it somewhere, I will never tell you something off the record again. I tell them that up front. If I ever use the phrase, which I rarely do, hey, I'm going to tell you something off the record, I look at them in the eye and I say, I'm going to do this one time, and if you mess me over, you will never get another bit of information out of our office ever again. Now, if you try that, usually they'll honor that. Because there are certain newspapers today, maybe I've mentioned them, who I won't give information to. And so anytime you see them write an article about our agency, they have to say this line. Earlier today, the Houston Chronicle reported that the Attorney General's office, let me tell you, they hate that. They hate it. And so don't violate the rule. So I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. I try to let them know that we can talk off the record. I'm very careful depending on who it is, but I want to try and believe that that still exists. For media guys, that's kind of like attorneys, attorney-client privilege. I mean, you just want to believe that we can still have that.
How many of you folks have spoken off the record before? Been asked by your press office to speak off the record? Yes, sir.
Yeah. What an interesting... He's talking about a very interesting intersection he has in his professional journey where he's at East Texas, or is it Texas A&M Commerce? Sorry, when I was a kid, it was East Texas State. Texas A&M University of Commerce. And so he's at that entity. They have a media outlet as a part of their organization. How do you work together? I mean, the dummy answer is you just have to figure out how to work together. Even though they're a part of the team, they still have to play by the rules. They still have to follow the laws. They still have to follow statutes. They still fall under open records requests. I think if you ever start laxing on some of that, you can get yourself into a mess later on down the road when you don't necessarily want to give them everything. And so I would, like I do with my kids, start out strict, and you can always back off later. Just my opinion. Who else? Thank you, sir. Great question. As a public official, do you have an ethical responsibility to answer the media? Is that a fair summary of what you asked? To answer the media. My answer to your question is yes and absolutely. Unless that reporter doesn't have the ethical responsibility to report fairly and honestly, and at that point, I'll never talk to you again. Call the open records office. It's just how, I mean, again, I sit down with these folks, I build relationships with them, I give them my personal cell phone, we talk, I tell them these are my ground rules, I meet with them, we have lunch, we have happy hour, we do all these things. And if you violate that, the ethics have to go both ways. And the problem with our culture today is journalists and reporters no longer have ethical responsibilities, but they demand everybody else does.